Hey, how's it going, everyone? This is Ben from The Hobbyist and from the newly christened Nomad Gearworks. So it's been a while since I posted a video. I've been busy with work and projects and other things I've been working on. I did actually just make and release a new product that I'm really excited about, and I would have loved to sit here and talk to you today all about the new NomadPort, the magnetic pass-through system that allows you to use your, if you have a diesel heater, to cut a hole in your tent and then just mag right on pipe connectors and things like that, or you can just go ahead and stick them through. And while I would have loved to talk about that, I seem to be getting a lot of pushback initially from people that are really asking questions like, why heater, right? Like, oh, you're using a heater. So I kind of wanted just to take a few steps back and just kind of talk about in general, just camping and heaters, like why I'm using the heater and sort of the what the problem was and why I kind of needed to engineer a solution. I do go camping quite a bit with my family, mostly just with myself and my 11-year-old son, but sometimes my wife and my 14-year-old daughter do join us. We're heavily involved in scouts, so we do a lot of camping with scouts. So this is a lot of, up until this point, it's been Cub Scouts, so it's all car camping that we're doing. Now that we're going transitioning into Boy Scouts, there'll definitely be a lot more, hiking and things like that. But there's always a need for car camping, right? And my general, school of thought is if I can take my car there, whatever I can fit in my car is all fair game, right? I'm not expecting. I'm always generally like to do primitive camping, so I generally am not going to spots that have, water and electrical and things like that. I'm usually bringing all my own, and I generally feel like I said, it's fair game, right? Like I'm not an ultralight backpacker, camper, doing all that stuff. Like I might get into that, and that's sort of a different piece, but it's really just car camping now, right? And I know a lot of people just, want to go easy, and just go camping with their kids, go in a campsite, be comfy, cozy, and do all the fun camping things, right? Like there's no need to be hardcore crazy, right? There's every level of camper in there, and they're all good. We all like getting out to nature. We all like hanging out. So what's the difference? So, with that, it's like, so I was using a heater, right? So a lot of us, we want to have some sort of heating in the tent. And if you go start searching online, what you're going to end up seeing is the Mr. Buddy propane heater, right? That's the most common. You can find them on Amazon. Tons of people buy them. I know people that use them. I have one. I've used one for quite a while. So I just kind of wanted to talk about that. So I started with the Mr. Buddy heater because that was the name of the game, right? If you look for a commercial product that's out of the box that you can just use, like Mr. Buddy Heater is gonna be the way that you're gonna go, right? The problem is a few problems. There's logistics issues, there's safety issues. I'll kind of try to get into some of those here real fast. Just to hit the safety issues first and foremost, one, you do have a flame in your tent, right? The Mr. Buddy heaters, it is a big, it's a small flame, but it's a big heat plate, like that's super hot. And it is have things on it where if it falls over, it shuts off, and it supposedly will shut off if it there's like carbon monoxide sensors, so it could shut off because of that. And those are really the two main concerns from a safety perspective with the Buddy heater. It's causing a fire or dying from asphyxiation from carbon monoxide. So, the ways to mitigate this, and if you use a Mr. Buddy heater, you probably do a lot of these things, right? Is carbon monoxide wise, I have, I don't trust the Mr. Buddy heater and whatever, sensing capability it has to turn itself off. I don't know. And I'm certainly not putting my life and the life of my family in that. So I do have a carbon monoxide detector, right? And if you buy one of these too, right, these are not the standard carbon monoxide detectors that you may have in your house that are required by law, because those are different, right? Those are set to only go off if they pass a certain level of carbon monoxide for a certain period of time. So it's so many parts per million for, it's like a minute or 2 minutes, whatever the timer is. These ones are different. These ones are highly sensitive, and they immediately go off, right? And there's a buzzing sound, and then depending on sort of the rate of the tone, it's supposed to give you an indication of like the level, of carbon monoxide. But if it beeps at all, you have carbon monoxide and you want to get out. So I do have one of those sensors. I do hang it from the middle of my tent where you would hang a light. I do have a fan that I put there. And then I also hang the carbon monoxide detector. And it does legitimately work because I've had it in my pocket and I've walked into my tent passing the exhaust, and it did beep when I was passing by. So it definitely does work. It's very sensitive. So we have that in there for the carbon monoxide, right? Because that's the issue with the buddy heater is when if you seal up your tent and you have a buildup of carbon dioxide, what will end up happening is at some point propane will stop burning the oxygen. It'll start burning the carbon dioxide, which will then produce carbon monoxide, and then you will die. So the way to mitigate that, right, is like having the carbon monoxide detector hanging, and then also not completely closing off your tent, right? Like I may sometimes put in the Mr. Buddy Heater days, I would put an additional blanket over my tent. I have a 3-season tent, so it's, as I'm sure you all know, it's got mesh like 3/4 of the way, almost halfway, like on almost all sides, all the way up, right? So it just wind goes right through. So usually what I'll do is I'll put a blanket over that before I put the rain fly on, and that keeps a lot of the heat in. But even with that, I still open in the windows, right, on both sides to make sure I do have an airflow going, because you just absolutely have to if you're going to run one of those in an enclosed area, right? You should never have an open flame going in an enclosed area. So key number one. The other side of it is fire, right? Like I'm usually there with at least my son. Is he going to kick it over accidentally, during the night? Is it going to fall? And trust me, I did things to try to mitigate that as much as possible. But like, no matter what, if it falls, you can cause a fire, right? It's going to create an issue. So there's definitely the safety issues on that side of it. The other side of it too is it uses a ridiculous amount of fuel, right? So it's like the Mr. Buddy heaters come with, you can just use 1-pound tanks. Those tanks, depending on if you're running on higher load, in my personal experience, I found it to be like 2 to 3 hours basically, right? Like if I'm running it on high, I get maybe 2 hours, a little bit more. If I'm running it on like a mid to low, I can maybe get a little bit more than 3 hours. So that means if I'm running that thing all night, I'm going through 2 or sometimes 3 tank changeouts, because yes, I do run it all night. So one, that's, I'm usually awake anyways because the Mr. Buddy heater makes me nervous. So I'm always awake. I'm always kind of checking it. It's hard to get a real comfortable sleep. I always have to swap those things out every time, having to restart, and it's like 3 in the morning, like click, 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 click. Try to start this thing with other people camping there. I hate doing that. I've had issues starting my Mr. Buddy here where it doesn't just start right away. I've had to take a lighter to it. And like I said, 3 in the morning, having to deal with that crap was like, oh God, just a nightmare. The other part of it is a massive amount of moisture buildup, right? So if you're using the 1-pound tanks, you already know you go to switch that out and it's covered in ice, right? And then whatever you set it on has usually got a bunch of water on it, which I didn't realize at first because I ended up setting it on my battery that I made for camping. I set it on top of that, and of course there was water all over it. Thankfully, it was sealed and there was no issue, but that was a little concerning. So it definitely does create a lot of moisture on the unit itself, also in your tent, right? So you'll notice that your tent is going to have moisture on the inside. So that definitely being an issue. The other side, like I said, just the amount of fuel. So I did end up switching from the 1-pound tanks because I was sick of doing that. I switched to like a 10-pound tall boy, which is the same height as like a standard 20-pound tank. It's just thinner. Because it fits into, I did that because it fits into a bucket that I bring with me for my hand washing station, so it worked out. But even with that 10-pound, it's like I was testing it and I could do 2 nights of full high heat and have enough leftover fuel for cooking and coffee and all the things I legitimately need propane for cooking. Or I could do 3 nights, but then that's pretty much all the fuel I have, right? I would have none for cooking. So that's a lot of propane. It's just a lot to bring. It gets expensive. It's a lot to refill every single time. It's super annoying. So for all those reasons, yeah, I started Googling around, and like diesel heaters seem to be the way to go. So, and I saw a lot of people using them in rooftop tents and things like that. Not as many people doing it with just regular tents. It was more like a van life kind of thing. So I ended up going down that route of doing the diesel heater, which I posted a video. You guys can see I have a video on my channel about showing my heater off and sort of the build that I did. It's still a work in progress because I've been kind of building it and remounting it in the box and all that stuff. So I do have to do some work on it, but it works great, right? So like now that I have the diesel heater, it eliminates all of the safety issues, right? There's no flame in my tent. There's no issue with carbon monoxide or anything like that because it works as a heat exchanger and it's outside, right? It has 2 intakes and 2 exhausts, right? 1 intake and 1 exhaust is specifically just for the combustion chamber, and that is all outside, and that is all completely separate from any of the air, right? There's a completely separate chamber where air is brought in through an inlet and then exhausted out into the tent. Only the metal touches the burn chamber, right? So the burn chamber heats up the metal. The air just flows through and gets warm from that, right? So you're not getting any chemicals. You're not getting any. There's really no chance unless somehow it cracked and the exhaust started coming in, right? And that exhaust you absolutely will smell. That's not a carbon monoxide, right? Is odorless. So you don't know if it's leaking into the room, but if some of your exhaust from the diesel heater starts piping in your tent, you will smell that 100%. So. But that's basically a non-issue, right? So all that's outside. There's no fear of fire or anything like that. Like it's just the glow plug inside, which is buried deep inside of it. As long as your exhaust is clear of anything flammable that might be right around, right? You wouldn't want like dry brush like hanging right onto the exhaust because it does get quite hot, and that potentially can start a fire. So that's really the area that you want to keep clear. But again, that is outside the tent, right? So at this point, the biggest issue is how do you vent it and get the ducting inside the tent? That was where my big issue was. That was why I ended up coming up with this whole NomadPort system, only because I do use a large tent, and I was having to, it's a 2-bedroom tent, and the door being on the front. I was having to use about 15 feet of pipe to go from the front of the tent where the heater was outside all the way in back to the room that we sleep in. And by the time, the air went through, I was using, actually, I have this pipe here. This is the pipe that I was using, about like 15 feet of this, and it is meant for heat. You can see it's got the foil inside, so this is meant for heat, but this is not insulated, right? You can get insulated ducting, but it's really thick, and if you're bringing like 10 to 15 feet of that, forget about it. Like it does not fit in the the shopping bag that I had for it. So even then, just going through that amount of pipe, it's like a warm breath by the time it comes out, right? So that was not enough. So that kind of led me down the whole path. I started Googling around to see like, oh, there's got to be, like, what if you want to cut a hole in the tent, right? I want to cut a hole in the tent. I need something for strain relief that I can do that, right? And there's nothing. There's nothing. I couldn't believe it. I Googled it. There was nothing. So I have a 3D printer now. I can engineer my own solution. So I did, right? This was the idea that I had in my head, is I just wanted to be able to take two things on either side of the tent. So you would just glue this. You put glue on both. I use super glue in my testing, has been the best. It does take two people. So you have someone on the outside, and then you kind of just bring them together. The magnets lock into place while the glue dries, right? And once that glue dries, you just have to cut this out, and then now you have a pass-through into your tent. Now you could just do this right on the sidewall of the tent. I did test it on test material that way, and it totally works fine. My intended use case though was really through the mesh of like a window, or in my case, the back of my tent has an air vent that has mesh on it. Right, being a summer tent, it has this air vent on the backside, so I was able to put this on the mesh and then cut the mesh out, and then that's how I vent it. So I posted some of the pictures on some places, and I'll try to get some of the pictures up here. I'll try to pop one up here too, so you can kind of see what that looks like. So now the heater actually goes on the back side of my tent. It's only this amount of pipe. It's just, from right into the tent. And then I use this piece here to put it on the inside of the tent and then direct it where I want it to go. And that's right where we sleep. So it's perfect. I've used it on several camping trips already. I've had like over a 20-degree boost in the temperature in the tent, which has been amazing. Again, considering this is a 3-season tent, I'm not putting the blanket covering the mesh. I'm leaving it open right now just because I wanted to see how well it worked, and it works great. And I'm using a smaller 2-kilowatt heater if anyone's interested. That's a whole nother discussion. 2 kilowatts or 5 or 8, where to go on that. I'm a big believer that the 2-kilowatt is the way to go, unless you are, and I'm heating a large tent, like I said, that's not insulated. It's not really even covered, right? I'm getting air right through, right? And the 2-kilowatt is more than enough for my needs. So happy to get into that if anyone's interested to know why. So I did want to talk real quick about the diesel heater. Some of the, I've been getting some questions as far as, its operation, right? Is it loud? Is it smelly, noisy? All those kinds of things. And in general, I say everything is pretty manageable, right? So the noise, with one caveat that I'll get into, with the heater that I have in the setup, I have the noise is not an issue. So it is running. There is an electric blower fan. That's, part of the heat exchanger part. That is what's, blowing the air through. So you do hear a fan, right? Now, a lot of us, I know I do. I have a fan in my tent that I hang, battery operated fan. I got it right here. That I hang to help move the air around if it's hot, or if I'm, using the heater, I like to move the warm air around to kind of get it back down where it's cold. So I have this fan going, and usually that fan is louder than hearing the fan outside. It's really just a white noise sound, so it's totally fine. I camp in groups where I have other tents, right around me, and no one's had an issue or complained or said they could hear it or anything like that. The biggest things when you go to initially start it up for maybe the first 5-10 minutes while it's starting up before it's fully running in its efficient mode, it does billow out a lot of white smoke, so that is definitely very noticeable, and I sometimes get some looks on that. I usually try to wait till just after sundown when people are starting to go over to the fire and not really looking over at Tent City, and then usually it has a remote, right? So I'll usually do it from my chair at the campfire. I'll usually start it, glance over, I'll see the smoke, and then once the smoke's gone, I know, like, okay, we're all good. But aside from that, the noise is not an issue. The caveat to that is a lot of these, they do come with the fuel pump they come with can be noisy. It's like a metal ramrod type pump, so you do get this sort of metal like tick, 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 and it's going at, depending on how, if you're running at 3 hertz or something like that, right? That's 3 times a second. So it's like you can imagine you're going to hear that. And if you're someone like me that fixates on sounds like that, that was a deal breaker. There's no way I could have this thing outside my tent and hear the tick, tick, tick. You can watch tons of YouTube videos on things that people have done to mitigate that sound, trying different pumps, putting it out. I mean, and I've done all that shit too. I've done like all those things, and they can help, but there was nothing that got rid of it. I ended up having to get a custom-made pump by some guy in the EU that makes these things uses an electronic solenoid, so it's completely silent. So that's kind of one of the amazing things about the setup that I have. It's a little bit pricey, but hey, you can't put a price on toasty warm, heat, right? Especially you start getting into like all the cold weather gear, like to legitly set up, and it can get really expensive going that route too. So, I mean, either way, you're going to be spending some money. So I think the diesel heater is the great way to go. I'm curious to see what you guys think. If you're thinking about if you use the diesel heater, let me know. I'd love to know your experiences below, how you set it up, how you've got it into your tent. I've seen some people that do have tents where they do have flaps and vents specifically for that. I'm looking at a couple of those tents myself. But I know a lot of the tents that we get, they're just kind of these cheap, inexpensive tents on Amazon. They don't. I mean, even the main tent I use doesn't even have a spot for like a extension cord, which these days I find shocking. But they're out there. So maybe I'll make another version of this that's smaller, so we can get some extension cords and possibly some feed lines through for some of you ham radio operators. So can you imagine? You can have a nice little spot that has a cap too. So if you're not using it, where you can have a feed line come right in, towards the top of your tent, right into your station. So yeah, I'm working on that too, guys. I'm curious to see what everyone thinks, though. If you're, wondering about the diesel heater, if you're on the fence, drop some comments and questions below. I'd love to hear what you guys think, answer any questions you may have. So yeah, please let me know what you think. And you guys have a good one. Happy camping. Bye.